used this Wacom notepad, and I think I messed things up quite a bit because my handwriting completely went astray when I tried to use the Wacom notepad, and I couldn't change colors. I imagine that it must have been a bit confusing, to say the least, to many of you. So, what I intend to do today is, of course, continue to discuss the applications of Euler's equations in practical systems, in engineering systems, and so on. But to also, uh, uh, do a slightly more detailed recap of what we discussed in the previous lecture, in the hope that this more detailed recap would make up for the lapses that happened in the previous lecture on account of me trying to use Wacom Notepad. So, other than that, I have nothing else to begin the class with. I want to thank Yogesh for sending the homework, the homework grades to you guys. And if you have questions, you can talk to Yogesh. And if you don't agree with what Yogesh thinks, then you're welcome to talk to me as well. So with that, let us get started with today's lecture. Let me share the screen. So are you guys able to see my screen? Can someone unmute and tell me?
Yes, sir, we can see.
Okay, great. So we are back to familiar tools here. So today's lecture is about the gyroscope. Okay. And before we talk about the gyroscope, as I said, let us briefly recollect what we discussed in the previous lecture. So we talked about applying Euler's equations to understand the dynamics of two different systems. One was a swash plate, which was a plate that was inclined to the axis of rotation, but otherwise was rigidly fixed to it. And the other was a free symmetric top. Actually, we went to the free symmetric top by looking at this wash plate being able to rotate about the shaft axis. And from there, we saw under what conditions this could reduce to the case of a symmetric cylindrically symmetric object rotating in free space. So what I shall do is I understand that there are several coordinate systems that come into play when we discuss 3D rigid body dynamics. So I shall try to color code the axes. Okay. So for example, I'm using green color now to represent all the objects that are fixed to the shaft's axis. For example, in the case of the swash plate itself was fixed to the shaft's axis. So I'm drawing it as a green rectangle, and the shaft, of course, also was fixed to that. And then what about the bearings? The bearings were fixed to the inertial frame, right? So I shall draw it with the blue color. The blue color is everything that is fixed to the laboratory inertial frame. The green color is the one that is shift to the shaft, and ultimately the red will be the one that will be the independent rotation. Okay. Although at this point in time, for this specific problem, we don't have a red color. Just give me a minute, please. Yes. So are you able to see the difference in color, or is it too feeble for you to make out that one is in green and other is in red, other is in blue? Can someone let me know? Give me some feedback.
So yeah, color is visible, sir.
No, but I think if you use
Color
some
is
red
visible?
color or something, it would be more better, sir. If you use some green
not
and blue
very.
are more or less similar only.
Yes, sir, they're similar.
Green and blue are
Kind of
more or
similar.
less similar.
We can
Okay,
sir.
so
the
that's
thing
very
is, but red color would have been more appropriate.
no, red we'll use later. But this is black color. Does it make any difference? No, probably, right?
No. It's fine.
No.
Blue and
Okay.
green.
Okay. For the moment, let it be blue and green. As we progress, we will definitely use the red color, but not right away, because this problem is not the one that we are really ultimately interested in. So then in this case, we of course defined our inertial frame to have its z-axis aligned that way and the x-axis aligned this way. It was center of mass of the swash plate. We ignored the inertia of the shaft, and the y-axis was into the plane of the paper. And as far as the intermediate axis was concerned, we defined one intermediate axis which was aligned with, whose z-axis was aligned with the ZA axis. So this is ZA comma ZB1, and I have drawn that in green color. And then another axis was, if you look at it from the top view, it rotates along with the plate. Okay, so if this is XA, YA, then the other axis, the B1 axis, is XB1. This is YB1. Okay, and the angle between them changes with time as theta z is equal to omega z times t. Where omega z is the speed with which this shaft was assumed to be spinning. Then we had a third frame, which was the body frame, but that frame was coincident. That frame was also, rotating with the shaft because this plate was fixed to the shaft. And that frame, I'll just draw the B1 and the B frame separately here. So this is ZB1 and this is XB1. And the x-axis of the B frame was tilted with respect to the x-axis of the B1 frame by an angle theta, so that the normal to the plate was aligned along the z-axis of the B frame. So this was the other frame. So the rotation matrix involved a rotation about the z-axis first by omega zt, and about the y-axis next by an angle theta. Okay, so these were the two things. Then we computed the angular momentum for this, and in the B1 frame, we could have chosen to work with the body frame. In both ZB and ZB1 are body frames, by the way. We could have written down the equations in either of the two frames, but we chose to write it in the B1 frame because the angular velocity has a simple expression in that frame. And that we saw was given by I0z minus I0x times sine theta, cos theta, omega z, and 0, and I0x sine square theta plus I0z cos square theta times omega z. Okay, so what was therefore the most interesting and important realization in this problem was that there was this angular velocity vector which was pointed along the z-axis of both the A frame as well as the B1 frame, but the angular momentum was not pointed along the axis of angular velocity. This is the major difference when it comes to analyzing rotational motion. It's in very rare situations that the two are aligned. In general, they are not. In particular, we see that it has an x component. So the angular momentum had an x component, and there was some angle theta which is decided by the ratio of these two terms. But if you look at the x component, okay, the z component, when these two vectors look fixed in the B1 frame, but B1 frame, as we discussed, is rotating with the shaft, and therefore this will change with time. In particular, we see that the z component will not really change because the ZA and ZB1 are aligned, so there is no change when B1 rotates about the z-axis. But then the x component changes direction, though not magnitude. So when you look at it from the top, when you plot the XA frame and YA frame, so this vector HB1's x component is aligned with, let us say, the x-axis to start with of the A frame, but it is rotating with respect to the A frame at a rate omega z. So after some time, it would have changed direction. So the acceleration is therefore perpendicular to this particular vector for small changes. And we know that that's going to be given by omega z cross of HB1. Omega z represented in the B1 frame. Okay, so this was the reason. This acceleration is always pointed in the body frame. Therefore, it's always aligned along the YB1 axis. And that is the one that is responsible for for us to have torques about the y-axis. That's that requires us to have reaction forces about the y-axis, reaction forces that apply moments about the y-axis. Okay. Then the second problem that we considered was that of a rotor which had a very similar geometry as this washed plate above, but with the exception that the rotor could spin in relation to the shaft. So I shall draw the rotor this time with the red color. Okay, so this is the red colored rotor, and there is the shaft which I shall draw in green color, and I hope the color contrast is right now slightly better. And then we know that the shaft is rotating about its axis with respect to the plate is rotating with about the axis of the shaft with respect to the shaft at a rate omega s, and the shaft itself is rotating about its longitudinal axis at a rate omega z, exactly as before. And we were asked to find the bearing reactions. The bearing reactions, I shall draw the bearings in blue color. This was the problem. Okay, so here we first went about defining our coordinate systems. So the first coordinate system was the A frame, which of course its z-axis was aligned with the z-axis of the shaft, and x-axis was this way, and y-axis was this way. And the B1 frame had its z-axis again aligned along with the z-axis of the A frame. Okay, but its x-axis, of course, kept changing its pointing direction with respect to the A frame. So the angle theta z1 was equal to omega z times t, and then the y-axis also, of course, did the same thing. So this was the first intermediate frame. This is xb1, this is yb1. Then the second intermediate frame, I shall draw the xb1 yb1 frame here. This xb1, this is yb1. Oh, I'm sorry, I drew it in red. I should have drawn it in green. So these kinds of mix-ups will happen now if I use multiple colors. But anyway, please bear with me. This is yb1. The second intermediate frame had its z-axis aligned with the surface normal of the plate. So that was zb2, and xb2 was similarly tilted at a constant angle with respect to the P1 frame. And the third reference frame was the frame that rotated with the plate, that was fixed to the plate. That was really the body frame, because in this case only the plate is assumed to have inertia. The shaft's inertia is ignored. So if you look at it from the top, you know that frame, I'll just draw it this way. This is XB and this is YB, and it is tilted with respect to the XB2 and YB2 by an angle theta Z2 equal to omega s t. So this was the these were the coordinate change transformations that were necessary to go from the A frame to the B frame. So the rotation matrix between relating the orientation of B with respect to A was comprised of three elementary rotations. The first was about the z-axis by an angle theta z1. The second was about the y-axis by an angle theta. The third was about the z-axis again by an angle theta z2. So we use ZYZ Euler angle convention to represent the orientation of this thing. So what we noticed in this problem was that the total angular momentum H was equal to, we had to first decide on which frame to go with. So we had a small discussion on that. We noticed that in the B frame, which is the traditional conventional frame in which we write the equations, the omega z vector would change as function of time. It would rotate about the omega s vector. So we didn't want that change of vectors with time to exist in the frame that we picked. And that was the motivation for us to go with the B1 frame, because in the B1 frame, both omega z and omega s are fixed. They are both fixed vectors. They don't change with time in the B1 frame. But then that doesn't necessarily guarantee that the angular momentum will be a fixed vector, right? Because we know that the angular momentum's direction is not in general related to the angular velocity direction. So if the angular velocity is fixed in a particular frame, it doesn't necessarily mean that the angular momentum is also fixed. But in this particular problem, so the angular momentum was, as we discussed, it was a sum of the angular momentum on account of the rotation of the plate about the inertial axis at an angular velocity omega z, plus the angular momentum in the B1 frame on account of spin about itself in relation to the shaft at a rate omega s. So these were the two components. And we saw that the first angular momentum from the previous problem was, we knew that that was fixed, right? That was at a certain angle to the vertical. It had a certain x component. Now the second angular momentum also fortunately ended up being fixed. The first component ended up being fixed because of cylindrical symmetry and the previous problem. This other component ended up becoming fixed because omega s was along the principal axis of that plate, and therefore the angular momentum was aligned with the principal axis, namely the z axis of the body frame. But fortunately, in the z axis of the body frame is a fixed vector again in the B1 and B2 coordinate system. So whichever one we pick, here I pick the B1 coordinate system. So the angular momentum due to this term here is also fixed, and that I shall draw with a red color. Okay. So these were the two components, and then we saw that. So this one, for example, if the spin direction is this way, the angular momentum was just a scaled version of that, with the scaling factor being I0z, the principal moment of inertia, third principal moment of inertia of that disk, namely about its z axis. Okay. So from this, we noted that the x components of these two together, when we add them together, is the one that's going to be changing with time, and that change will be along again the YB1 axis for exactly the same reasons as before. And to cancel that, we need a reaction force F1x, which was given by I0z minus I0x sine theta cos theta omega z square, which was due to this first component here, plus I0z omega s sine theta, which is due to the new spin of this plate about its longitudinal about its symmetry axis, divided by the spacing between the bearings, namely L. Then we asked this interesting question as to the circumstance under which this force becomes zero. This was not a mere exercise in algebra, but it had profound physical consequences, and we saw how it could be potentially made zero. So this vector, for example, is I0z omega s. So if omega s is positive, it is this way. If omega s is negative, it is in the other direction. So if omega s is just of the right amount, then the x component of this first term here will exactly cancel the x component of the other term there, with the consequence that the overall angular momentum vector will now be aligned only along the z-axis, and the x-axis components go away. Okay, so this was a point that I just wish to make before we proceed further, because I did not make this in the previous class. So in the previous example of the swash plate, what we noticed was that the angular velocity vector was aligned along the z-axis, whereas the angular momentum vector was tilted. Okay. In this problem, however, so this is the angular momentum, this is the angular velocity, omega z. In this problem, however, the angular momentum, which is the sum of the angular momenta of the spinning wheel as well as the swash plate, rotating swash plate, that has a component only along the z-axis if omega s is chosen carefully. In other words, when the reaction force becomes equal to zero. And when does that happen? When this sum becomes equal to zero, and that's at omega z equal to minus I0z divided by I0z minus I0x cos theta. So at this special frequency of rotation about this axis, about the ZA axis, the reaction force becomes zero. And in that happy circumstance, the angular momentum has only a z component, which is a sum of the z components of this guy and that guy. These two don't cancel necessarily. See, for example, just because the x components cancel doesn't mean that the z components also cancel. There will be a certain non-zero z component if these two vectors are tilted at some angle with respect to one another. So therefore, in this problem, what we see is that the angular momentum vector h is pointed along the z-axis, but the angular velocity vector for the rigid body is not really along the z-axis. In the B1 frame, it is the vector sum of omega z and omega s. So it will be at some strange angle. This is the omega vector. Okay, so there is this strange difference between the two problems that we discussed. In one case, omega z is aligned along the z-axis, but angular momentum is tilted. In this case, angular momentum is aligned along the z-axis, but omega is tilted. Okay, now we saw that in this situation, when we have this tilted plate and we don't need bearings anymore because the reaction forces are zero. And the shaft anyway was never assumed to have any mass, any significant mass, so that was also removed. So what we were left with was this plate. It need not have been a plate because in writing any of our expressions, we did not make any explicit assumption of the plate-like nature of this particular object. All we assumed was it was a cylindrically symmetric object. So that was all that was necessary. And then if we remove the bearings and the shaft, what we are left with is therefore a cylindrically symmetric rotating object. Okay, and this we call as a free symmetric top. Okay, now when I say free, I want to qualify it by noting that it doesn't mean that gravity does not exist in this problem. Of course, these symmetric tops can be tops in space, can be satellites and such other things, spacecraft and so on. But more conventionally, they can also be objects on ground, with the exception that gravity does not have any effect on the rotational dynamics. That's what we mean when we say it is free. There is gravity. So when we consider the case of the frisbee, for example, it is of course bound by this mg acting down. Okay, but it is still considered a free symmetric top because this force does not apply any moment. Okay, we are doing all these analyses about the center of mass, and therefore this force does not apply any moment about the center of mass, and therefore this is considered a free symmetric top. Here we discussed that in the for a person who is standing outside, he will notice this motion about the z-axis, this omega z. When you visualize how this plate will change its shape when it is rotating about the z-axis by omega z, you will notice that it will tend to wobble back and forth. Now it is like this, but after some instant it will be like that, and so on, right? So we called omega z as a wobble frequency. And then the same person will also see that this symmetric top is rotating about its surface normal at a rate given by omega s plus omega z cos theta, right? Because relative to the shaft, it is rotating at a rate omega s about this axis, and the shaft itself is rotating along a different axis at a rate omega z. So if you take the component of the angular velocity, it will be omega z cos theta. So when I do this, I get this to be omega s naught, the spin speed as seen by an observer outside, and that was given by I0x minus I0x, I think. I don't know whether it was I0x or minus I0x. I think it is minus I0x by I0z minus I0x cos theta. Okay. So you see that it appears to spin backwards. Actually, the sign of that spin, you see, this is omega s here. So the sign of the spin is dependent on this difference between I0z and I0x. If I0z is greater than I0x, then for this to be a free symmetric top, the wobble frequency has to be negative of the spin frequency, and that kind of situation is called as retrograde precision. So omega z is also called a wobble frequency, or in other words, a precision frequency. Precision frequency. Okay. So when omega z and omega s are of opposite sign, it's called retrograde precision. when omega z and omega s are of same sign, it's called direct precision. So if it is a cylinder, for example, then it's possible for I0x to be greater than I0z, although that is not true for a plate-like object like a frisbee. But in that case, these two can still rotate in the same direction, and you can have the angular momentum aligned only along the z-axis, and the x components cancel one another. But in this case, one has to opposite in the other direction relative to the first one. So omega s naught, sorry, there is no cos theta at the bottom. It's just omega s. So omega s naught, if you just plug in this expression here, you will get the spin speed as with respect to the surface normal, and that is so this is basically the the component of spin speed along the body's z-axis, and that's given by this particular expression here. Okay, so for the case of the top, we notice that the wobble frequency, spin frequency by wobble frequency, if you simply substitute from the expressions, you get it to be 1/2 cos theta. Okay, so what this indicates is that when theta is very small, cos theta is very close to 1. So even for fairly large theta, cos theta is close to 1. It's a very slowly decreasing function of theta around theta equal to 0. So when you fling a frisbee, therefore, the rate at which that frisbee wobbles back and forth is exactly twice, almost exactly twice the rate at which it spins about its axis. And this is independent of how you release it, because the moment you release it, it becomes a free symmetric top, and it has to satisfy this particular relationship. So that was this interesting relationship that existed in connection with symmetric tops. And as I mentioned in the introductory class, this was what somehow inspired Richard Feynman to work on related problems, perhaps in quantum electrodynamics, that finally fetched him the Nobel Prize. Okay, so this was where I think we had stopped in the previous lecture. So any questions about this material? Okay, so there are no questions. Let us now proceed further. So we talked about the picture in the case of the frisbee of how an outside observer would view this spinning top. Okay, the spinning symmetric top. Now, how would this top look for a person in the body frame? Okay, so how would the angular velocity be for a person in the body frame? Intuitively, it is clear to us if you look at the coordinate system. So the body coordinate system, I will draw this straight now. Okay, this is, let us say, ZB, and this is XB, and this is YB. This is the body coordinate system, and the for reference, I shall draw the plate also here. This is ZB, this is XB, and YB is into the plane of the paper, and omega Z is inclined at an angle theta to the Z axis here. So how would omega Z appear in this particular case? It will, if I were to produce the X axis back, it will look something like this. It will have components along the Z B axis as well as the X axis. But you need to remember that the body frame is rotating with respect to the B1 frame at an angular velocity omega s, right? So this is actually a fixed vector in the B1 frame, but the B frame is itself rotating with respect to the B1 frame in the counterclockwise sense at a rate omega s. So what will happen to the components of this vector? It will change in the clockwise direction as function of time. So the Z component will remain the same, that will not change. The X component and the Y component, however, will change as function of time as that angle theta Z2 changes. And just from this schematic, we can quickly write what the XYZ components of omega s would be. Sorry, omega total angular velocity would be. Sorry. you have the angular velocity omega s aligned along the z direction, and on top of that you will have the z component of omega z, and that will be omega z cos theta. Okay, so that is going to be the z component, and we noted that this is nothing but we defined this as omega s naught, right? So this is omega s naught. What about the x and y components of the angular velocity vector in the body represented in the body coordinate system? So this is represented in the body coordinate system, omega b1, sorry, omega b, sorry. Okay, that from this schematic, if initially the b1's x-axis and the b's x-axis are aligned, then the component will be minus omega z sine theta, right, when it is aligned. But as time progresses, it changes. So I'll write cos omega st. It changes as at the same rate as a spin frequency omega s. The y component will be omega z sine theta once again. Okay, it will become positive as time progresses because this is spinning in the relative to the body. This will be spinning in the clockwise sense, and therefore this will be plus omega z sine theta sine omega st. Okay, so this is going to be the representation of angular velocity in the body coordinate frame. You can also obtain this more formally by noting that in the B1 frame, these two are fixed vectors. Omega z is along the z axis, so 0, 0, omega z, and omega s has x and z components in the B1 frame. So it will be omega s sine theta, omega s cos theta, and 0. So these will be the vectors omega s and omega z in the B1 frame. So the net omega in the B1 frame will be omega s plus omega z, both in the B1 frame, correct? Now we note that the B frame and the B1 frame are related by a rotation matrix. So the orientation of B relative to B1 is given by the rotation matrix about the y-axis by an angle theta times a rotation matrix about the z-axis by an angle omega st. So we use this to represent omega in the B frame. That's going to be equal to the rotation matrix of B1 with respect to B times omega in the B1 frame. Okay, we have the omega in the B1 frame here obtained from these two expressions, and therefore we can obtain omega in the B frame. When you do the math, you're going to get the exact same result here, which we obtained just by an intuitive understanding of how this omega z vector changes as function of time when it is represented in the body coordinates. Any questions about this? Okay, so why are we doing this? We are doing this for two reasons. I want to give one more example, practical example. Earlier I took the example of a frisbee and showed that the frisbee spin rate is exactly half of the wobbling rate. The second example I want to take is that of our own planet Earth. Okay, so we are all people who are moving along with Earth, right? So we are in a body fixed coordinate system. Now, you would probably say that, well, Earth is a sphere, right? So if Earth is a sphere, if you look at your equations, let me show you the equations again. If you look at the equations here, all these terms will exist only when I0z and I0x are not equal to one another. But if Earth is a sphere, then I0z and I0x should be equal to one another, and therefore there should be no, wobbling. There should be no precession and such other motion, such other kinds of motion. Well, it turns out that the Earth is not really a perfect sphere. That's because Earth is molten at its core, and because it spins, centrifugal forces stretch the regions near the equator a little bit more than the regions near the poles. So Earth is not a sphere, it actually looks a little stretched near the equator. So it looks somewhat like this. Okay, so it's not a perfect circle. I'm drawing a perfect circle for comparison. Okay, this is called as an oblate spheroid. That's the name of that name given to that solid. It is, if I were to take any section in this plane, it is a circle along the equatorial plane. But if I were to look at if I take a section in the vertical sense, it will not look like a plane. Okay, the diameter near the equator will be more than the diameter near the poles on account of centrifugal force. Okay, so because this is the case, I0x and I0z are not the same. Okay, which means that even for Earth there can be wobbling motion. So for Earth, we note that we wrote down the equation, right, that relates the wobble speed to the spin speed. Let me just get that once more. We wrote down that I0z omega s by I0z minus I0x times cos theta, right? This was equal to omega z. This is the wobble frequency. This is spin frequency, right? As people, attached to Earth, we are going to be seeing the spin frequency. Of course, we'll be seeing omega s naught also, but it turns out that omega s naught and omega s are not very different from one another. So what we have therefore is that, let me write it in the next slide. I0z minus I0x divided by I0z times omega. Sorry, I think I have made a mistake here. I'll just rearrange. I will just rearrange this equation and write it as I0z minus I0x times omega z is equal to omega s. Okay. Yeah. Now in this equation, I think my interpretation of these variables was wrong when I just now discussed. Omega z corresponds to the Earth's spin about its axis. So this is spin speed of Earth. And what is that equal to? 2 pi radians in 1 day. Okay. There is a certain amount of wobble associated with this. Again, I'm sorry for mixing up these terminologies. In relation to Earth, it is the opposite of whatever I talked about in connection with the frisbee. But it turns out that this term here is around 1 by 300. Okay, so this difference in moments of inertia between z-axis and x-axis to that of z-axis alone is 1 by 300. Okay. Oh, I think. I'm sorry. No. This is omega z by 300. This is correct. Yes. So what we have therefore is that this is the wobble speed, wobble rate. So wobble rate is 1 by 300th of the spin rate. Okay. So since the spin rate is one revolution in 1 day, the wobble rate is 1 revolution in 300 days. Okay. So this wobble is called Chandler wobble, named after the person who studied it, Chandler wobble. So the Earth actually, because it is not a perfectly spherical object, I0x and I0z are not the same, and therefore there is a certain small amount of wobble, and that wobble frequency is 300 times smaller than the spin frequency. Okay, and this is called Chandler wobble. It turns out that the wobble rate, wobble time period is 300 days. According to this calculation. Well, it turns out that the actual wobble rate, when you measure it experimentally, is not really 300 days. Actual is actually 424 days, not exactly 300 days, but it's a little bit more. So what explains this small difference? It's because Earth is not a perfect rigid body. Okay, the inside of the Earth is molten, and therefore it has viscoelastic properties. It's not a rigid body, and therefore there is no exact match between the wobble time that you would get by modeling it as a rigid body, but the actual wobble time. But to a large extent, you see the order of magnitude of this wobble rate has been captured by this rigid body model. Okay, so this is one example where we have this picture of angular velocity changing as function of time when you're in the body coordinate system. So I gave an example of how a precessing and spinning rigid body would look when you are in an inertial frame in the case of the top, and now in the body fixed frame. All along, I have avoided obtaining the dynamics using Euler's equations. In principle, I should run it in the body fixed frame from the beginning, but I went with intuition because that was more easily understood. And up to this point, we have not had to formally solve any differential equation to obtain the evolution of omega as function of time. Okay, in the case when there are no moments acting on a rigid body. So it is about time that we spend maybe a few minutes trying to solve this differential equation to confirm that whatever we have done so far without formally solving this differential equation is right. Okay, we shall do that next. Before that, I want to know if you guys have any questions. Yes, Subhadeep Sahu has a question.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Sir, you have just interchanged the representation, right? Omega z used to be wobble speed earlier case, and omega s used to be spin speed. Here you have just interchanged, or it is the same?
I see the interpretation of these things. I am not very clear. I mean, I thought I had it all fine until the last moment. I thought omega s should represent the spin speed and the omega z should represent the the wobble speed for Earth. But when I look at the equations, it's clearly not the case. Okay, there has been some mix-up. So as a stopgap makeshift solution, I have redefined these variables for this particular problem alone. Okay, why exactly is it this way? It doesn't agree well with my common sense. That's all. Okay, so I've interchanged these variables only for this particular problem. Although intuitively I would expect this to represent the spin speed. Why is it representing the wobble speed? Because only if it represents the wobble speed do you get the correct expression. That the wobble rate is 1 by 300th of the spin rate. Okay, so why is that done is not clear to me at the moment. I'll maybe get back to you guys some other time about this. Okay.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you.
But this result is correct. This result is correct. Just that the application of the equations to get this result, there seems to be some intuitive gap which I'm not able to immediately fix, and I will think a little bit more and get back to you.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So now let us formally solve, the Euler's equations in principal coordinates in the body fixed frame to show that, whatever we obtained as angular velocity earlier for a free spinning top. Let me show that expression once again. Here is that expression. This is the expression that we got. Okay. Can we obtain an expression of exactly the same structure as this one by applying Euler's equations? We are supposed to get it. Right, so let us try to do that now. So what are Euler's equations? I0z, I0x, omega x dot plus I0z minus I0x, omega y, omega z equal to 0. Then I0y, omega y dot, all this is in the body coordinates. Okay, and the body coordinates, in this particular case, we have chosen them to coincide with the principal coordinates of the body. I0z minus I0y, but because it's cylindrically symmetric, it is I0 x itself, omega x, omega z equal to 0. I'm having 0 on the right hand side because this is a free symmetric top. There are no moments acting on it. And I0y here also gets replaced with I0x. Okay. Then finally I0z, omega z dot plus I0x minus I0y, omega y, omega x equal to 0. Now you notice that since I0x and I0y are equal for a cylindrically symmetric object, this term here goes to 0. So this is the equation for a free symmetric top. Okay, so what does that give us? That I0z omega z dot is a constant, or in other words, omega z is a constant, is equal to 0. I0z omega z dot is equal to 0. Omega z is a constant. Okay, if you know what is omega z, it is the z component of angular velocity in body coordinates. And if you go back, flip through your notes, you will notice that this is nothing but omega s naught, because omega s naught was a net angular velocity resolved along the z axis of the spinning frisbee, for example, and that's corresponds exactly to omega z in this particular equation. Maybe to avoid confusion with the omega z that I had defined in other places, I shall call this as, I shall put a superscript b here to all these components. That way you will not face confusion with what we have used omega z also in the previous case of the spinning shaft, spinning swash plate and so on. So to avoid confusion, I'm calling this omega z in the B frame. Okay, so this I can plug it into these equations. I get I0x omega x dot plus I0z minus I0x omega y times omega s naught is equal to 0, and I0x omega y dot, because I0y and I0x are the same, sorry, plus I0z minus I0x omega x omega s naught is also equal to 0. Now you note that I0z minus I0x divided by I0x times omega s naught by definition is equal to minus omega s in the previous derivation. I'll just show that again to you. Where is that? Here it is. This is not the one, I'm sorry. Here it is. So if you look at this equation here, omega s naught is equal to minus I0x omega s divided by I0z minus I0x. So omega s naught times I0z minus I0x divided by I0x is minus omega s. And that is precisely what I have written here. Okay, so therefore I would have I0x, if I remove this, omega x dot minus omega s omega y equal to 0, and then omega y dot minus omega x omega z, sorry, omega x omega s omega x is equal to 0. If you simplify this, so is this step clear? Does anybody have questions about how I got here? Please raise your hands if you have questions. Okay, so this is clear. Then I have these two equations. They are coupled differential equations. I can differentiate this one more time and replace. I will get omega x double dot minus omega x omega y dot equal to 0, and I can put this in place of omega y dot. So with this I would get omega x double dot plus omega s square omega x equal to 0. Okay, is this what you get? I think there is a problem here. I think there's a, you will not get this expression because I have written these equations wrong. This is not I0, this is I0z minus I0x, and I think here it is I0x minus I0z. There's a sign reversal here, which I have not written down in my notes. I'm sorry, please make note of that change. So this is going to be minus here. Okay, So in which case this is going to be plus. So if you do that, then you get this expression. So I have not written down the Euler's equations correctly. If you check your notes, I'm sure you will see that this whatever I have written now is the correct sign for these coefficients. So with the correct sign, if you substitute all these terms, you get this to be the expression. With the consequence that you get omega x is equal to some amplitude cos omega st. Okay, this is the solution to this. This is the equation of a simple harmonic oscillator, right? So you get this solution, and similarly omega y will be equal to a sin omega st. Okay, and omega z we already found out is omega s naught. So these are the three components of the angular velocity vector in the body coordinates. And if you look at the expression that we had for that earlier, I'm juxtaposing the two. You see that the fundamental physics has been captured. You have cos omega st, sin omega st, and omega s naught. Both of them have been captured. It is just that the signs are different, and that's got to do with the phase difference that there would be, because if I were to add an extra term of the kind some phi to this, it will not change the nature of the solution in any way. So if I choose a phi such that it is equal to pi or something, I get back this minus sign also in this particular problem. So therefore, what you see is that by solving Euler's equations, formally by solving the differential equations, the kind of omega vector you get as function of time is exactly what we got earlier without formally solving this differential equation. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, so let us now, having discussed the free symmetric top and the and the examples of the free symmetric top, let us now return to the original problem that we were considering. The case of a shaft, an eccentric plate on a shaft. Okay, in this case, we provided an alternate explanation to understand why there would be moments that the bearings need to apply, or why there would be reaction forces at the bearings. The way we did that was to consider two tiny masses dm at symmetric locations with respect to the shaft's axis. Okay, and we noticed that this one here experiences an outward force, a centrifugal force. It is given by dm times omega z square times r, where r is this radius vector. And this guy also experiences an equal and opposite force, dm omega z square r. And these two forces are offset from one another. By this, the directions are the same, but they're not acting along the same line. They're not collinear forces. There's an offset of some amount, which is 2r sine theta in this particular case, and therefore there's a moment, right? There's a couple that gets generated because of these two forces, and that is what is responsible for the reaction forces here. Now, can we come up with a similar explanation for why you would have reaction forces also in the case of a spinning wheel? So if I were to replace this wash plate with a spinning wheel, and this time I'm drawing it in red color, whether you're able to see it or not, I don't know. So I have the shaft. What happens in the case of the spinning wheel? I'm sorry, I have not drawn the shaft symmetrically. Consider the same two elemental masses. Okay, maybe I will draw a better schematic. I'm sorry. Just strike it out. Draw a better schematic here. What forces are at play that contributes to this extra moment that the bearing reactions have to provide when you have spinning of the wheel also? So there is a bearing here. Okay, so there is the same elemental mass dm on either side. Now you notice that because this wheel is spinning about its axis at an angular rate omega s, there is this particle dm has also a linear velocity at a distance r relative to the rotating shaft, which is given by omega s times r. Okay, so this is the shaft is rotating about its z-axis at a rate omega z. Okay, this is spinning at a rate omega s relative to the shaft, and therefore, if I consider any mass here, that mass is moving at a linear speed equal to omega s times r if that mass is at a distance r from the axis of rotation. Okay, so now what you have is, and what is the direction of this velocity? It is it's along the y-axis. It's along the, in this particular configuration, it's into the plane of the paper. Okay, and this mass here has the speed exactly in the opposite direction. It's coming out of the plane of the paper. Okay, so you have omega z pointed up, and then you have this particular velocity vector pointed into the plane of the paper. So what will you experience? Therefore, you will have a Coriolis force, because you have this dm moving in a rotating reference frame. What is a rotating reference frame? It's that B1, the reference frame fixed to the shaft. Okay, with respect to that, this guy is moving on account of it rotating at a rate omega s, and that relative velocity of omega s times r contributes to that mass experiencing a Coriolis force, which is given by V cross omega. So 2 times V cross omega, 2 times dm times V cross omega. That will be the Coriolis force, and that again will be pointed outwards for this mass and in the opposite direction for that mass, because this mass has a velocity in the opposite direction compared to that. That's going into the plane of the paper, is coming out of the plane of the paper. So you see that this also has, a couple. This also generates a couple in exactly the same manner as that generates a couple. Okay, and therefore you have that extra moment that these that these bearings have to apply in order to keep this spinning. So this is therefore an alternate explanation which is far more down to earth and easy to understand compared to the previous one that we provided, where we saw that the angular momentum was at a different direction with respect to the omega z axis, and that contributed to a changing x component. That's one interpretation. Another, more intuitive interpretation from a qualitative perspective is the picture that I have shown here. Just as the swash plate experienced a moment because of centrifugal force, here this spinning swash plate experiences a moment because of both centrifugal force as well as Coriolis force. So the spinning of this plate with respect to the shaft contributes to a Coriolis component, and spinning of the shaft itself with respect to the inertial frame contributes to the centrifugal component. Okay, so I just wanted to point out this picture to make this more intuitive and easy to understand, and then move on to the next discussion, which is about the gyroscope. Any questions before that? Okay, if there are no questions, then let us consider, actually, even before we talk about the gyroscope, let us consider one important application of these kinds of wheels. So we wrote down the angular momentum for the general case at some angle theta. Now what happens when angle theta is 0? So this is the angle theta, right, at which the plate is inclined, at which the surface normal to the plate is inclined with respect to the axis of the shaft. Let us say that theta was equal to 0. How would this plate look like? Its surface normal would be aligned with that of the shaft. So the plate and the shaft together look something like this. Let us suppose we bring back the bearings. The configuration will look something of this kind. Okay, then the B1 axis, Z axis of B1, A and B will all be coincident. Okay, so the only difference between the B1 axis and the inertial frame will be captured by a rotation matrix about the Z axis. That's it. Z of B with respect to A will be equal to RZ of theta z1 plus theta z2, where theta z1 is omega s times, sorry, omega z times t, and theta z2 is omega s times t, as we had written before. Okay, so there's just a single elementary rotation that is relating the two. Now, what is the use of this kind of a plate? Let us say this plate is kept spinning by a motor. I'll write a motor here. So if the motor, what will the equations be? Because this is a symmetry axis, this is the principal axis of this plate. I can write that I0z omega z dot is equal to the moment m applied by the motor. But remember that omega z dot is not the absolute angular velocity of this plate. So I have to write I0z times omega z dot plus omega s dot. Okay, that's the total angular velocity. That should be equal to the moment applied by the motor to spin this plate. Okay, so now suppose I attach to this plate another big object, attached to this shaft another big object on the other side here. Okay, let the moment of inertia about the z-axis for this, the principal moment of inertia, be I0 z1. Okay, now because my motor is applying a moment m on this particular plate, by Newton's third law, an equal and opposite moment should be experienced by this particular big object here. So I would have therefore that I0 z1, which is fixed to the, maybe I should draw it in green color to indicate it is fixed to the shaft. Okay, I0 z1 times omega z dot would be equal to minus m. Okay, so what this therefore indicates is that I0 z1 omega z dot plus I0 z is plus I0 z omega z dot plus omega s dot is equal to 0. This is essentially a statement of conservation of angular momentum. That's it, because the rate of change of angular momentum here of this particular solid object and the rate of change of angular moment of this particular solid object is this one here, and the rate of change of angular momentum of this particular solid object is that one there. The sum of them have to be 0 because there are no external torques that you have applied. The motor is internal to the system, so there's no external torque that the motor is applying as far as this system of two circular objects is concerned. Okay, now what is the use of this? Suppose I want to change the, let us say initially, so let me continue further. I0 z omega s dot plus omega z dot plus I0 z1 omega z dot equal to 0 implies I0 z omega s plus omega z plus I0 z1 omega z is a constant. Okay, so that angular momentum is a constant. I'll rearrange the terms. So I0 z plus I0 z1 times omega z plus I0 z omega s is a constant. Okay, so I have this wheel and I have this shaft about which it can rotate, and there is another solid object connected rigidly to the shaft. Okay, this one has I0 z as its principal moment of inertia about the z-axis, and this one has I0 z1. Okay, so let us consider one simple case where this constant is equal to 0. So the initial angular momentum is 0. Then by changing the orientation by spinning the this particular wheel at a certain rate, I can also spin this other rigid body, okay, in the opposite direction. And this kind of a wheel which allows me to control the orientation of a bigger rigid body is called as a reaction wheel. Okay, so the problem of this swash plate with a swash plate rotor reduces to a reaction wheel when theta is equal to 0. Okay, what is the use of a reaction wheel? Let us go one step further. If this equation is valid, then in a certain time delta t, I would have that I0z plus I0z1 delta theta. What shall I call this? Delta theta z should be equal to minus I0z delta theta s. So if I want to change the orientation of this by a certain amount delta theta z, I can spin the wheel by an angle delta theta s, which is given by this expression here, to change the orientation of the other rigid body by delta theta z. And where is this applied? It's applied, for example, in changing the pointing direction of telescopes in space. So if I have, let us say, this solid object carrying a telescope. Okay, so this is a telescope. To change the pointing direction of the telescope or to make fine adjustments to the pointing direction. You see, with a telescope, it's very important that you keep it pointed at a certain specific location in the sky. And sometimes you can have some space debris come hit this structure and impart some angular momentum to it and so on, or change its orientation by a small amount. Now, what this reveals is that by changing the orientation of this wheel back by a small other amount, you can compensate and bring the telescope back and get it to point at the same location in the sky. Likewise, if some small angular momentum is imparted to the telescope because of some debris hitting it, the wheel can spin in the opposite direction so that the telescope stays, the angular velocity of the telescope, which is omega z, becomes equal to 0. Okay, so it continues to stay pointed at a certain location in the sky. Now, why is this kind of a solution? This is called as a reaction wheel, and I have a a web page, a YouTube video that talks about reaction wheels. Let me just show you that video. Are you guys able to see the video? Are you guys able to see this? Wait a minute. Just a moment. Not this one, the other one. Yeah, you are able to see a telescope here, right? Can one of you unmute your mic and yes. So let me just play the video for a few seconds and you will see how the orientation of the telescope is changed. So they close the telescope, okay, and then they change the orientation. They get it to point in a different direction altogether. And now the telescope will be able to stare at a different point in the sky. Okay, so this is accomplished not with just a single reaction wheel, because this involved rotation in 3 directions, but more generally you can have reaction wheels along just a moment. You can have reaction wheels in 3D. You can have 3 reaction wheels inside your your telescope or spacecraft and make fine adjustments and change the orientation of the spacecraft in 3D by appropriately spinning these reaction wheels. Okay, so this is one particular application. Why is this desired in space? You know, there's also another way to change the orientation of a spacecraft, and that is by using thrusters. But then with thrusters, you see there's only a finite amount of fuel that you have packed into the spacecraft, some finite amount of hydrazine that the spacecraft carries. And it's very precious. You don't want to use it needlessly. Whereas you have solar power freely available to the spacecraft. It always will have solar panels, so it can always use that solar power to run a motor. So if it is possible to do some maneuvers using a motor rather than by using by spending chemical fuel, that is a preferred way of doing it. And what you saw here was the use of this kind of a wheel to change the angular momentum of the overall spacecraft by spinning the wheel about its axis. Okay, you will have 3 wheels in 3 different directions. Of course, the equations may not look as simple as they do here. I've considered only one axis, only along the z-axis, and you spin the wheel in one direction, the spacecraft turns in the opposite direction by a different amount, and the 2 are related by this particular equation here. Although this example is simple, it illustrates the principle that you can use these wheels to control the orientation of spacecraft in space. In particular, this is widely used in telescopes. For example, Hubble Space Telescope has reaction wheels with integrated into it. The second extreme scenario is when theta is equal to 90 degrees. So we now considered the case when theta was equal to 0 degrees, in which case the z-axis of the spinning wheel is aligned with the z-axis of the shaft. The alternate configuration is when the z-axis of the spinning wheel is at 90 degrees to the z-axis of the shaft. I'm drawing that scenario here, drawing the picture here. Okay, before I do this, any questions about reaction wheels and how they work? Okay, I see that there are no questions. So the second scenario is when the rotating disk, that swash plate that we have been considering, is at an angle 90 degrees with respect to its surface normal is at 90 degrees with respect to the shaft axis. And in that case, I shall draw this a little bit better. I shall draw the shaft this way. Okay. So the green one, as always, is the B1 coordinate system. The B1 coordinate system's x-axis is this one. This is xB1. And that in this particular scenario will be coincident with the z-axis of the B coordinate system, which is attached to the rotating wheel. And the z-axis of the B1 coordinate system is, of course, aligned in this particular direction, ZB1, and that's also ZA. Okay. So in this particular case, if you see the angular momentum expressions, you will discover that the component due to centrifugal force, goes away. What you will be left with is, a bend. You will experience a torque about the y-axis only because of, this angular momentum due to spin changing direction when this shaft is rotated at a rate omega z. Okay, so when this shaft is rotated at a rate omega z, there is a torque experienced along the YB1 axis. Okay, so this kind of motion, by the way, of a disk spinning about one axis and that axis itself rotating about a second axis, this kind of motion is called gyroscopic motion. So gyroscopic motion, by definition, has two rotation rates associated with it. The first is a symmetric wheel such as this one, spinning about its axis at a very high speed, and its angular momentum associated with spin is aligned along this particular direction, along the ZB axis. And that wheel itself is rotated about a second axis. In this case, that axis is perpendicular to this wheel, and that therefore this combination of these two rotations makes this kind of motion gyroscopic motion. And what we noticed was that this gyroscopic motion generates a torque about the y-axis. So I need to have bearings here, and the bearings will have reactions that will try to counter the moment that is generated about the y-axis when I try to spin this thing about the z-axis, spin this shaft about the z-axis. Okay, so this phenomenon of the torque being aligned along the y-axis when the spin is along the z-axis, when the shaft is turning along the rotating about the z-axis and the spin axis is along the x-axis, this is one of the most counterintuitive phenomena associated with rotating rigid bodies. Normally, what we expect intuitively is that when we look at this wheel and we say, let us say I try to spin this about this axis, about the z-axis of the inertial coordinate system or the B1 coordinate system, I would expect it to accelerate in that particular direction. I would, in order to get it to spin at this particular rate, starting from rest, for example, intuitively it is clear to me that I would have to apply a torque along the longitudinal axis of the shaft. That much is very clear. Okay. For someone who is uninitiated, doesn't know anything about rigid body dynamics, that is very clear. But what is not at all intuitive for the uninitiated is the fact that when I try to rotate this shaft about the z-axis, I experience a bending moment about the y-axis, into the plane of the paper. How did that come about? How did that happen? Of course, we now have understood how that happened. That's because this moment, when I draw it in the top view, it's aligned along the xb1 axis, and this is yb1. Okay. When I try to rotate about the zb1 axis by an angular rate theta dot omega z, I try to rotate it. We notice that this vector, its magnitude remains unchanged, but its direction changes. And because the direction changes, there is an acceleration associated with that, and that acceleration is what contributes to that moment aligned, and that acceleration vector is along the yb1 axis, for example, and that is what is responsible for the torque also about the y-axis. Okay. Now this can be generalized. So for example, if I have a spinning wheel, okay, you can define, so this is a spin axis. You can define two other axes in the plane of the spinning wheel. Okay. One you can call as the x-axis, other you can call as the y-axis. So spin can be called the z-axis. Okay. If I apply torque, if I try to spin it about one axis, it will experience a torque about the other axis. So if I try to spin it about this particular axis, there will be a torque about that particular axis. That's exactly what we saw in this case. Okay. And if I try to, likewise, if I try to apply torque about this axis, it will try to spin about the other axis for exactly the same reason. Okay. So you can view this as one of them as input axis and the other as output axis. So the input could either be angular rate or torque. The output will be either torque or angular rate. Now, by applying an appropriate kind of input, if you apply an angular rate and you generate torque, this torque can serve two purposes. It can be used to measure that angular rate in some sense. Okay, that's one possible application. Or that torque can be used to counter some other disturbance torque that the structure is experiencing, as it often happens in case of ships and so on, where this phenomenon is employed. So this kind of an arrangement of a spinning wheel that is allowed to rotate about one or more axes is called as a gyroscope. Okay, let me draw a schematic of the most general gyroscope that there is. Any questions about this? So this is the most important, from an engineering perspective, the most important consequence of rotations of rigid bodies, this gyroscopic effect. When I apply torque about one axis, I have rotation about an orthogonal axis, or vice versa, and both these axes are perpendicular to the spin axis. This is highly counterintuitive, not at all obvious if you simply stare at this figure, but emerges as a result of our analysis of how the angular momentum changes when you either try to rotate it about a certain axis, as we have done in this case, or you apply a torque. Okay. Dinesh Kumar Agarwal has a question.
Yes, sir. This input axis, suppose we rotate this wheel with a constant angular velocity. So we will get output axis. Our output will be, what will be the output? Suppose this is rotating constant angular velocity spinning axis, and same in y-axis also constant angular velocity is there. Then what will be our output, sir?
We derived that in the previous class. We will derive that again here also. We noticed that angular momentum, if you are rotating at if this is spinning at a speed omega s, then the angular momentum is given by I0z omega s, right? So what will the torque be? The torque will be omega z cross acting on this particular vector, I0z omega s vector. Okay, so the numerically the torque will simply be I0z omega s omega z. That's it. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me go to the next slide. So let me draw a general gyroscope. So there is a wheel. At the heart of every gyroscope is a wheel that is spun at a very high speed. Okay, and so there is, you have bearings here, and this wheel is connected to what is known as a gimbal. Okay, so this gimbal permits rotations about this particular direction. Okay, then this gimbal can be connected to more gimbals. So there could be one more gimbal here. So this gimbal, for example, could be connected to one more gimbal. And this permits rotation about this axis alone. Okay. And finally, this second gimbal can be connected to some vehicle frame or whatever else you want. You can permit rotation about one final axis here. So this gimbal here can be connected. So this could be the fixed inertial frame. And now you are permitting rotations about 3 independent axes by using this arrangement of gimbals. Okay. So in this case, this is a gyroscope. It's this gyroscope where it is free to spin about 3 orthogonal axes is called as a free gyro. GYRO. Now what happens here is that if you set it spinning at a certain rate in the beginning, you notice that these bearings here decouple any rotations of this inertial frame or the frame to which this free gyro has been in which this free gyro has been mounted. They decouple the motion of that frame from the motion of the gyro itself. You cannot put a torque on the gyro when you have mounted the gyro with using these using the gimbals that I have shown here. Okay, so this, when you try to rotate, for example, let us say I mounted this on a vehicle. Okay, when the vehicle's orientation changes, the rotational motion of the vehicle's orientation is decoupled from the rotational motion of this gyroscope because these are all revolute joints here, and there are no constraints imposed to the rotation of this rotation of these gimbals with respect to the vehicle. Okay, so what will happen therefore is that this wheel will preserve its angular momentum in a certain direction. Okay, it will stay. Let us say I spin it and release it, whatever direction it was in, no matter how the vehicle moves about, this will retain that direction in space with respect to the inertial frame. Okay, so therefore the angles by which each of these gimbals change with respect to the gyro, with respect to the rotating wheel here, can be used to predict the pointing direction of this object. So let us say I mounted this on an aircraft, and the aircraft is changing direction. It is pitching and yawing and so on and so forth. When I have spun this on the ground and released it, regardless of how the aircraft is moving, this wheel is always pointed at a fixed direction in space. And by looking at the orientation of these gimbals with respect to the wheel, I can predict how this aircraft is moving. Okay, so this is one simple application of a gyroscope. It behaves as though it is a compass. Okay, it's not exactly. There's also something called as a gyro compass, which we'll talk about later. But this behaves somewhat like a compass. Okay, the problem with this, however, is that although we have assumed that it is free to rotate about these axes, you have bearings here and it's free to rotate, there will always be some small friction in the bearings. And even this disc is spinning about its axis. That spin is also retarded with time because of friction at the bearings. So although this can in principle stay put in a particular direction in space, the pointing direction of this wheel will always stay put and point in the same direction for all times. In practice, however, the bearings apply some small torque on the wheel, and the wheel itself decelerates. So this will start to lose its pointing direction as a consequence of these friction effects. So in practice, it will stay pointed in a certain direction only for a few minutes. So where can this be applied? It can definitely be not applied in case of spacecraft. In case of aircraft, because an aircraft journey has to last several hours. However, if you are trying to fly a missile, you want to guide the missile along the way, then you can integrate a free gyroscope into the missile. The time it takes for a missile to go from point A to point B is presumably not more than a few minutes because it travels so fast. Okay. Now to guide that missile, you can have a free gyro built into it, and that can do the job of telling the missile exactly where it is pointed relative to where it was pointed at the start of its journey. Okay. This is just one of the most simple, configurations of a gyroscope. There are several more, and I wanted to survey them in today's class, but I have now run out of time. So either I will do it in the next class, or I will conduct a special class maybe on Saturday or something to cover only gyroscopes. That class can also be used to answer other questions that you guys might have in relation to whatever we have discussed over the last 1 month. Okay, I had planned this to be the last class on single rigid bodies dynamics, but because of the issues associated with Wacom, and also because of some of the material that I had collected being more than what I'm able to present, I will probably shift the last class on gyroscopes and so on to Saturday. I hope that is fine with everybody. Saturday 10 a.m. or so. I'll make that announcement. I'll send out that email. Yes, does anybody have problems?
So actually, we have a test on Saturday from 9 to 10 slot. So if we could shift it in the afternoon, it would be much better.
Okay, either in the afternoon or maybe 10. We can start at 10:30 and we can go for some time. I don't think it will take a full 1.5 hour class, the remainder of this material. What I intend to do is spend 45 minutes discussing gyroscopes and their applications, gyroscopes in their various forms and their applications, and then open the floor for questions, general questions that you guys might have on the basis of whatever we have discussed over the last 1 month. That's what I thought I will do. So I'll discuss gyroscopes. I'll talk about a top spinning under the effect of gravity, and then have a general Q&A session with all of you. When exactly we do it, we'll discuss. You guys can tell me your constraints. So we already know that there's a person who has an exam till 10. Subhadip Sahu has a comment.
No, sir. Just now you have discussed about how the gyroscope is acting as a compass. Sir, I could not follow that. Can you please repeat that?
Okay. So, are you convinced of the fact that if I spin this wheel and release it, by virtue of the fact that you have these three bearings aligned along 3 axes, the motion of this wheel is decoupled from the motion of the object on which the wheel has been mounted on account of these 3 bearings, which decouple the motion of the wheel from that of the object? Are you convinced of that fact?
Actually, no, sir.
So you need to think about this a little bit in that case. So let us say this is some vehicle. This last bearing is connected to some vehicle, and this vehicle undergoes angular motion, let us say about this axis, this whatever axis that is. The rest of the structure is not obligated to move in the same direction, because this shaft here can freely rotate with respect to this vehicle about that particular axis. So therefore, since the shaft can freely rotate, when the vehicle changes orientation, the shaft is not obligated to follow the vehicle's orientation change. Is that clear? At some level, that's essentially what I'm saying. So since I have 3 bearings here, since I have bearings along all 3 axes, the rotational motion of this solid plate is decoupled from the rotational motion of the vehicle on which this assembly has been mounted. Okay, if this is not clear, you need to think a little bit about it, and I think it's going to be clear. Otherwise, we can talk again about it sometime later. The consequence of that is that if I spin this wheel initially, if I hold it in place and set it spinning at a very high rate and release it, this wheel will keep spinning. Because angular momentum has to be conserved, it will stay pointed in a certain direction and keep spinning at the same rate, no matter how the vehicle might move about. Okay, so I might start now and I might set it spinning in the north direction. Now the vehicle might turn towards east or west or whatever. The axis of the wheel will still stay pointed north. Okay, so when I measure the angle between the axis of the wheel and the the frame of reference attached to the vehicle, I can tell by what angle has the vehicle rotated with respect to the north direction. So that information can be used to guide the vehicle in a certain direction. That is the idea. So there is angular difference between the pointing direction of the wheel, which stays put because of this particular arrangement of bearings and so on, which stays put in space. The angular difference between that direction and the vehicle direction can be used to tell in what direction the vehicle is headed. Okay, and that can be used to guide the vehicle. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. And sir, one more question. Sir, have you
Yes.
told about how is it happening?
I could hear you clearly.
Sir, have you told that how is it happening? Because I could not follow. So have you told that
what is happening?
Yes, sir. Actually, why this is happening? Have you told that?
I could. Have I told what?
Sir, why this is happening? Because
why is this happening? Is it? I told you now, right? It's because of the arrangement of these bearings. It's because of the fact that I'm permitting free rotation of the gimbals with respect to the frame of reference of the vehicle on which it is mounted. Because that has been done, and when I set this wheel spinning, it retains its angular momentum. I cannot apply a torque on this as a consequence of the particular choice of the bearings. It will maintain the direction. The spinning wheel will maintain the pointing direction no matter how the vehicle on which it is mounted rotates about. So by measuring the angle of rotation between the vehicle coordinate system and the wheel's coordinate system, I can tell how much the vehicle has moved.
Yes, sir. It's clear, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay. All right. Any other question?
Sir, attendance.
I will download it. Thank you. Thanks for reminding me. Okay, so if there are no further questions, I will sign out. Oh, thank you.